I hope that you are well, and also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today, we'll be doing our grade 1 English lesson on sentence parts. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once we've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username, as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of English Language Arts. Grade 1. And then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of sentence parts. All right, so our chapter is sentence parts. Our subject is English Language Arts. We're doing grade 1. And in the lessons that we are going to be focusing on under the chapter of sentence parts is it naming or action part of is it the naming or action part of the sentence? So is it the naming or is it an action part of the sentence? All right. So when it comes to our different sentence parts, right? Then with our sentence parts, we have a naming part and we have an action part. The naming part, it tells us who or what the sentence is about, and that is the noun. That's who or what the sentence is about. Can be a person, can be a thing, can be an animal, right? The sentence is about that person or that thing. And if we look at an example, right? So once again, we say that with each sentence, right? we have a naming part, and we have an action part. And the naming part of the sentence, it tells us who or what the sentence is about. Can be about a person, can be about a thing, can be about an animal, right? But this sentence, it's about someone. That is the naming part. And if we look at an example, the first example says, the dog eats a bone. The dog eats a bone. Who is that sentence about? So if we were to ask ourselves, who is that sentence about? Then we say that sentence is about the dog because it's telling us what the dog is doing. And that is what we call a naming part because it names who the sentence or what the sentence is about. That is what it's telling us. So that sentence is about the dog. So now the question is, what is that dog doing? Then we can say the dog eats the bone. The next sentence is, that airplane is big. That airplane is big. And if we look at that sentence, what is the naming part? Who or what is the sentence about? The sentence is about that airplane. It's telling us about the airplane. What is it telling us about the airplane? That it is big. And then the next one says Jim is happy. So now the next one says Jim is happy. And if we were to find out who or what that sentence is about, and in that sentence we can say is about Jim. And what does it say about Jim? It says that Jim is happy. So Jim, that tells us who the sentence is about. It's about Jim. So if we look at these three examples, right? These three examples, it's a naming part and it names who or what the sentence is about. And we said in the first sentence, the dog eats a bone. The sentence is about the dog, that is the naming part. The next sentence is that airplane is big. So if we were to ask ourselves who or what that sentence is about, then we can say that sentence is about the airplane because it's telling us how big it is. And the next one says Jim is happy. Who or what is that sentence about? That sentence tells us about Jim and it's telling us that Jim is happy. Then we said a sentence has a naming part that tells us who or what the sentence is about, but a sentence also has an action part. With every sentence, we have a naming part that tells us who or what is doing who or what is doing something in the sentence. And then the action part tells us about the naming part, right? So if we're talking about Jim, or we're talking about the airplane, or we're talking about the dog, right? That is the naming part. Now, when it comes to the action, we now need to say what is that naming parts within that sentence doing? Because with every naming part, there's an action that they are doing. All right. And the action part of a sentence, it tells something about the naming part. And what does it tell us about the naming part? It's telling us the action part, right? It can tell what the naming part does. So let's say, for example, they are saying that Jim is happy or Jim is laughing, right? Now, Jim would be our naming part, but now the action part tells us what Jim is doing. It's telling us what the person, what the thing, what the animal is doing within that specific sentence. It can also tell us what the naming part is like. What is the animal like? What is the person like? Like, what is the thing like? And if we look at the first sentence, right? The first sentence says it says the dog eats a bone. So the dog eats a bone. And if we look at that specific sentence, right? It says the dog eats the bone. We said the naming part is the dog. Now we need to say what is the dog doing? And we can say the dog eats. That tells us what the dog is doing, and eats is the action part that tells us what the naming part, which is the dog, is doing. Look at the next one. The next one says that airplane is big. The naming part is the airplane. Remember, we said that the action part, it tells us either what the naming part is doing, or it's telling us what the naming part is like. So it says that airplane is big. So it's not telling us what the airplane is doing, but it's telling us what the airplane is like. So which means that if we say what the airplane is like, or we were to identify that, and then we can say that this airplane is big. So big tells us what the airplane is like. Then the next one says Jim is happy. Jim is our naming part, right? Jim is who or what the sentence is about. But now we need to say what Jim is like or what Jim is doing. So yeah, they're not telling us what Jim is doing, but they're telling us Jim is like. Jim is happy, right? So that is our action part. So like we said, within our sentence, we have an action part and we have a naming part, right? And we see the naming part, it tells us who or what, you know, the sentence is about. It's either a person or a thing that they're talking about within that sentence. And in the action part, it tells us what the naming part is doing or what the naming part is like, right? All right, so now we're going to go to aplusstudents.ca and we're going to go over naming part or sentence parts. And we're going to say, is it a naming or an action part of a sentence? And here, once again, we say that every sentence has a naming part and every sentence has an action part, right? And we said a naming part tells us who or tells us what the sentence is about. That is the naming part, who or what the sentence is about. And then we have the action part, right? And we see that the action part within a sentence, it tells us the action or tells us what the person or thing is doing, what the naming part is doing, or what the naming part is like. All right. So now we're going to do a little activity before we go to our test. It says, look at the part of the sentence in bold. So we need to look at this part that's in bold, right? And now we need to say, is it a naming part or is it an action part? We need to say, is that a naming part or is that an action part? It says, Mary sang a pretty song. So Mary sang a pretty song. Do you think that is a naming part or do you think that is the action part within a sentence? Do you think that's a naming part or do you think that is an action part within a sentence? And if we were to look at that sentence, right, that says Mary sang a pretty song, then this word that's in bold, right, we can say this is a naming part. So this is a naming part because it tells us who the sentence is about. That sentence is about Mary, right? So if you look at the name of a person, right? If they're making mention of a name of a person, they're making a mention of an animal or making mention of a thing, then we can say that is a naming part of a sentence. All right. Now look at this sentence, right? It says you need to say, is it a naming part or is it an action part? My friend brings me flowers. Brings me flowers. Is that a naming part or is that an action part? And if we were to say if that is either a naming part or if that is an action part of a sentence, then we're going to look at this word brings me flowers. Who is bringing you flowers? My friend, right? But now brings me flowers. That is the action part of a sentence. And it's telling us what the naming part, which is my friend, is doing. Brings me flowers, right? That is the action part of a sentence. Because it's something that the person is doing, something that the naming part is doing, which is the person, which is my friend. All right, let's look at the next one. We need to say if it's a naming part or an action part of a sentence. It says the door opens wide. The door opens wide. If you look at that sentence, is that a naming part or is that an action part? Are we naming something or are we showing an action? And if we were to say if that is a naming part or an action part, then we can say that is an action part. And why do we say that's an action part? We say that's an action part because it says the door opens wide. What opens wide? The door. The door is the naming part, which is the thing that opens wide, that is doing an action. So it's an action part. So if you see that it shows within a sentence that something is happening, or something is taking place, then that is an action part. Or if we are just naming someone or naming something, then that is a naming part. All right, let's go to our test. We need to look at the part of the sentence that's in bold, right? We need to say, is it a naming part or is it an action part? So here we need to look at this sentence. It says, bees make honey. Bees make honey. This word bees, is that a naming part, the first one, option one, or is it an action part, option two? So bees make honey, is that a naming part or an action part? Naming part, option one, or is it an action part, option two? Bees. And if we were to choose the correct part, right, then we can say bees. That word bees, it is a naming part because it is telling us what the sentence is about. It is about the bees, so it's a naming part. All right, look at the next one. We need to say if the word in bold, which is our dog, if that is a naming part, or we need to say if that is an action part. So our dog barks at squirrels. So the word our dog, is that a naming part or is that an action part? So we need to say if that is a naming part or if it is an action part. Our dog barks at squirrels. And if we look at that sentence or that word that is in bold, then we can say that word in bold is a naming part, which is option one. It's a naming part because it's telling us what our animal is doing. The naming part tells us who or what is what the sentence is about. All right, so we can say that's a naming part. It's telling us who or what the sentence is about. The next one says, these shoes make funny noises. So these shoes make funny noises. If we look at the word in bold, right? Yeah, it says make funny noises. That words in bold, is that a naming part, which is option one, or is it an action part? These shoes make funny noises. So make funny noises. It tells us what our naming part is doing. And what is the naming part? The naming part is these shoes, right? So make funny noises. It tells us what the shoes is doing. So we can say this is an action part. All right. So that's an action part. Now it says Robin found a penny. Robin found a penny. Do you think the words found a penny, do you think that is an action part, or do you think that is a naming part? Do you think it's showing action, or do you think that they are naming someone or something? All right, so we can say found a penny, right? It tells us what Robin found or what Robin did, right? It shows us the action that Robin did. Robin is our naming part, right? So this shows the action. It shows us what Robin did. So this is an action part. All right. So we said that within when it comes to sentence parts, right? Then we have a naming part, and we said that we have an action part, right? And we said once again, a naming part, it tells us who the sentence is about, or it tells us what the sentence is about, right? And then we have an action part within a sentence. And we said the action part within a sentence, it tells us something about the naming part, something about the person, something about the animal, or something about the thing that we are making mention of. And also when it comes to the action part of a sentence, right? The action part can also tell us what the naming part does, meaning what the person does, what the thing does, or what the animal does. Or it can tell us what the person like, what the animal like, or what the thing like. And that is an action part. So in each sentence, we have a naming part that tells us who or what the sentence is about. It can be a name of a person, it can be a thing, or it can be an animal. And then we have an action part that tells us what the naming part does. The action that the naming part, which is either the person, the animal, or the thing, does. Right? All right. So now we're going to A plus students dot A plus classes.ca. We're going to grade 1. We're going to scroll down up until we get to reading. Then when it comes to reading, we're going to scroll right down up until we get to these 4 purple boxes. Then we're going to read along audiobooks book 1. So we're going to read along audiobooks 1. And we're going to the first book. We're going to read the first book, which is My Great Adventure with Nana. All right, so this is the book that you're going to listen to, right? Because this is books that you can listen to the pronunciation of the words and will also help you to identify certain words. All right, so My Great Adventure with Nana.
My Great Adventure with Nana by Armando Silva. Today is finally here. Today, today, today. Nana is taking me on my first adventure. I wonder what we will touch, smell, hear, or see. Nana does not drive, so we are taking the bus. I'm so excited we get to see the whole city on our way there. We are finally here, but I don't know what to do next. I grab Nana's hand and stick to her like glue. First, we acknowledge the land and show our respect. It is up to us to protect this sacred space. We can dance like the grass, shrubs, and trees, or be still like the boulders and rocks. We start walking west toward the mountains. Nana says, "Pay attention and ask questions. Listen to birds singing, feel your heart beating, and breathe in the smells of the earth." While we walk, we see rabbits, flowers, deer, and cacti. Other explorers ride bikes and run fast. Their footsteps sound like crunch, crunch, crunch. Shh, take a look over there, Nana says. Wow, the biggest bird I've ever seen is flying high in the air. It looks like a dinosaur. There is so much here to explore. We make it to the overlook and sit down for a snack. Things below me look so small. I grab Nana's hand and wonder what will happen on our way back. We are back at the trailhead, ready to go home. I hug Nana and say, "Thank you. I can't wait to do it again."
All right. So that is basically our one of our books when it comes to my great adventure, right? And if we look at naming parts, or we look at action parts that we identified within that book, right? Then my nana, right, is basically naming parts whenever they mention things or they mention people within that book. They were naming parts, right, of that book and all the adventures that they went on. That basically indicated the action parts. It showed all the actions that they took, or they basically explored, or the actions that took place within that book. So, if you look at all of these books, these are under A plus classes, right? And over here we have a lot of books, right? These are all audio books. So we are going to try and read at least one of these books whenever we have our session, right? With these books, they will also help you to pronounce words. You'll be able to identify words, right? And also, we will be able to have fun listening how somebody reads a specific book. Right? So these are all audiobooks. So whenever you have time, please go over these books and then you guys may read these books. All right. So before we end of our lesson, we did naming parts, right? And we said that when it comes to sentence parts, we have a naming part and we have an action part. We said a naming part, it tells us who or what the sentence is about. It can be a person, an animal, or a thing. And then we have an action part. And an action part tells us something about the naming part. It tells us either what the naming part does or what the naming part is like. And remember, we said that the naming part is either the person, an animal, or a thing. All right, so that is now the end of our lesson on sentence parts. Thank you very much, grade ones, for joining our class. And I really hope that you are going to have a good day further. So, till next time, goodbye.